Michael, yesterday's inflation number, 6.8%, showed ongoing improvement in the cost of living, but that is being called into question by the ACTU's minimum wage claim of 7% to the Fair Work Commission. Our business editor, Mr Greenwood, joins me. And Ross, the Reserve Bank Governor has warned about excessive wage claims.
He has indeed, and this is one of the issues that really has been, sort of, if you like, an ongoing theme in Australia's economy. While you've seen inflation and prices take off, you haven't seen the same thing happen with wages so far. But the wage price spiral that often accompanies rising inflation as wage claims come is one of the big issues. And so this claim by the ACTU of 7%, you can see here is higher than what the current annual rate of inflation is, according to yesterday's number. Now, up until now, of course, wage claims have been lower because the overall wage increases have been lower. And this has been the argument. But if we go through the monthly inflation, you can see where cost of living is really hurting Australia's workers. And in particular, the price of electricity, there's a pretty obvious one. The price of fuel, it's coming down. The price of housing, rents in particular, have been rising over the past period of time. So there is certainly pressure on the household sector that the ACTU is keen to try and avert. But the real issue here is if wages start to rise, then the inflation does not disappear anytime soon. This is the minimum wage claim from the ACTU, up 7% to more than $45,000.
So what about the government? The Industrial Relations Minister, Tony Burke, who happily I have on in just a moment, earlier said this week that the government would push for a wage increase equivalent to inflation. But what inflation rate is a pretty good question, right?
Right, that's a good question. I want you to put that to him right as soon as you speak with him. That's exactly right. Because there's the issue, is the quarterly inflation rate is still sitting up above 7%. This is the monthly inflation indicator, which is down at 6.8%. Now, if you're saying that really you want wages to rise with inflation, then you've got to take some countenance as to the fact that inflation right now is falling and is expected to fall from the maximum that we saw in December last year. Now, today, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, was asked about this. He indicated that the government won't put an actual number on what it believes the minimum wage should rise by. And that's where I kind of guess Tony Burke's comments earlier this week that he was expecting the government to put a recommendation that wages rise by inflation will be fascinating. Just to get a few more details as to exactly what the government's attitude about this is.
Yep, OK. So how have markets reacted to all of this? Generally, any hint of an easing off on rate rises? What's going to happen there?
Well, what happens is generally markets rise. Now, it was odd yesterday in Australia because you can see here today that the stock market is sharply higher. Now, that's all partly got to do with what's happening internationally with the bank crises easing, but also secondly about what's happening with Australia and the likely trajectory of interest rates, with the Reserve Bank now increasingly expected to keep interest rates on hold in April. The banks haven't started trading yet, but yesterday UBS, a number of other brokers, came out and downgraded the performance of the banks. So share prices in the banks yesterday fell when normally you would anticipate that they would rise. They are a little higher, I would presume, on today's opening. So it's just going to be interesting to watch it. But there is a few sort of moving parts here in the economy that play out in the markets, and that's where that little bit of uncertainty still remains.
OK.